All right, let's have a look. I actually pushed that one a little bit quicker than I intended to. 13, 13, 13, 12. So very, very consistent. Hey, what's up guys? I'm Billy with Spec Train. Thanks for tuning back in. Today we're talking about splits. How do I run my gun as fast as possible? This is probably one of my most highly requested videos that I've ever done. And I'm kind of embarrassed to admit one of the reasons I put it off so long is just that the internet's kind of decided that splits don't matter. And not only do splits not matter, but you shouldn't spend any time trying to get them faster. Now, of course, it only applies if you're at a certain level, right? If I only have half-second splits, if I'm shooting really slowly, everyone's like, oh, we need to figure out how to shoot faster. But once you get to a certain point, around point 2, people are like, just don't even worry about it, right? That's all fine and good. Generally, I find that the people who say that you don't need fast splits just simply can't do fast splits, right? And so what I'm gonna talk to you through today is if you want to learn how to run your trigger faster, here is the way to do it. Something I'm kind of known for is having those splits, and it took me a lot of time and effort. Anybody that tells you, hey, the guys that can do that just have a naturally fast trigger finger, I call bull crap on that, okay? Because I certainly didn't when I started. I had to work on this very, very hard. The drills I'm gonna show you today, I could not do well when I first started. And it took me a lot of time and effort and very intentional practice to get my speed to where it is today. And so I think I can show you a few things that'll hopefully be super helpful. But if this isn't something you care about, that's totally fine as well. To each their own on this, okay guys? We're gonna look at some component skills that I think stack up and equal a really fast shooter. Some of this is gonna be kind of old school, kind of basic level stuff for some of you guys. So I'll put timestamps down below, but here's the component skills we're gonna work through. We'll start off with how do I pull the trigger really fast without moving my gun? Because if I move the gun off target and I don't hit anything, obviously pulling the trigger fast is not gonna work out. How do I then reset the trigger really, really fast? To get back off the trigger and back on really quickly. Obviously that's required for follow-up shots. Talk briefly about recoil control. How do I make sure that as I pull the trigger fast, my gun actually stays on target? And then we're gonna talk about kind of the way that your brain processes time and how to rewire that a little bit to actually kind of unlock new levels of speed for you guys, okay? So first of all, how do I pull the trigger without moving the gun off target? A lot of us were probably taught to, kind of always prep the trigger, squeeze it carefully, let the gun surprise you when it goes off type of shooting. Obviously, that's not gonna work at all when it comes to shooting fast, right? So we have to be able to essentially jerk the trigger back when we're shooting fast and not move the gun off target. I'm gonna show you a way to train this that I first saw from Rob Latham. Ben Stager's made it pretty popular over the years. Ben calls it trigger control at speed. I like to call it jerk the trigger drill just because it makes people mad. But basically, that's exactly what you're gonna do, right? So in other words, what your start position for this is gonna be looking at the target, your sight's dead center in the center of your target, and I want you to just touch your trigger. Don't prep it. Don't actually move that trigger shoe at all to the rear. Just touch it. If you have a trigger safety like I have on this gun, you can just put enough pressure to get through that and actually touch your trigger shoe. And then what you're gonna do is as soon as you hear the beep of your timer, you're gonna pull the trigger to the rear as fast as you possibly can. It's gonna look something like this. So that was about a 0.15 is what I read on my timer. I consider anything under a 0.2 a pass. If it's over that, you need to work on getting that faster and making sure you're hitting the target. Now, I just did that in live fire. Where you're actually gonna see a lot of benefit to this is in dry fire because you're gonna do the exact same drill. And when you pull your trigger, what you're looking for is, does the gun jump off target as I pull the trigger? If it does, that's pretty much an indication that you're not just pulling the trigger, you're also changing the pressures in the rest of your hand as you pull that trigger. For right-handed shooters, this causes the gun to dive down to the left pretty consistently. It can go other places as well, depending on how the gun fits your hand. So that's what you're gonna try to do is get to the point where instead of when you pull the trigger, you see that gun move, you're gonna get to the point where you can just simply smack that trigger to the rear and the gun really doesn't move at all. And you're just watching your sights and trying to get to the point where you can smack that trigger and the dot doesn't dive off target. Ways to work on this, right? Number one, the more you do it, you're gonna feel yourself moving the gun and just stop that, right? But in addition, you can play around with the pressures in your hand, work on relaxing this hand potentially. We'll talk about that more in a second. And also, as always, make sure you're vicing down very aggressively, crushing the gun with your support hand, right? So again, what you just wanna kind of get to the point is where very consistently, you can just do this over and over again, just smack that trigger, and get dead center hits in under 2/10. That was another 0.15. Try it one more time. 0.17. There's definitely guys that can do this faster than I can do it. Some guys can do it under 1/10 of a second, right? If you have a really lightning fast reaction time. If you do it that way, your timer may not even read the time. A lot of timers have a minimum of 10 splits. So if you see a 0 in your timer after you do that, that's why. And good for you, right? I'm generally hover around that 0.15 mark, 0.14, somewhere in there. And that's kind of the goal. As I said, for me, anything under 0.2 is a pass. But what's super important is that as soon as you hear that beeper, you smack that trigger to the rear as fast as you can, because that's exactly what we have to do when we are running our trigger as fast as we can. We have to pull it hard and fast, and I have to figure out how to do that without moving the gun. So you're gonna do it in dry fire, and then you're gonna confirm it in live fire to make sure you're not lying to yourself on what you're seeing in dry fire. When we do this in classes with folks for the first time, we generally can push them out on head boxes, USB-C head boxes, to about 15 yards. They can get 100% hits in under 2/10 of a second. You can absolutely push it farther than that, but that's just kind of a goal time for you to kind of think about, okay? What we're going to talk about next is resetting the trigger, okay? A lot of people were taught to pull the trigger kind of like this. They pull the trigger, the slide cycles, I'm going to pin my trigger to the rear, and then I'm going to start letting it out, and I'm not going to pull the trigger again until I hear that click, right? So listen for that click. And they pull that trigger again, right? JJ Rakaza calls it click banging. I love that term for it. Basically what they're doing is they're letting the trigger out slowly and then smacking that trigger to the rear after they hear that click. This is the exact opposite of what we should be doing. Letting the trigger out slowly cannot possibly influence how accurate my shot is because the gun still hasn't gone off yet. So regardless of how precise my target is, as soon as this gun goes off, I'm always gonna get back off on the trigger as quick as I can and ready to shoot that thing again. So there's a couple ways that you can practice this in dry fire. Obviously, your gun's not actually gonna cycle. You're not going to have that recoil impulse. We can use our timer to replace the stimulus of the shot. I'll go ahead and pull the trigger, cycle my slide, pin the trigger to the rear, and then when I hear the beep, I'm gonna act like the gun just went off, and I'm gonna reset that trigger as fast as I can. Right, so hopefully by the time the beep stops, by the end of the beep, I'm already resetting my trigger. I can come to a prep like this, or I can actually come off the trigger and all the way back through. So again, I can watch it on video and see if I can actually get that second shot to go off before the end of the beep. Again, if I have about a 0.15 reaction time and a 0.15 split, that's about 0.3. The beep on my timer is about 0.33-ish, about a third of a second. And so I should be able to get that second shot off before the beep is even done on the timer. That's a way for you to check yourself in dry fire, right? When it comes to live fire, what I don't want it to look like is like this. Right, where after each shot, you actually see me resetting the trigger and you hear those audible clicks. What I wanna do is just as soon as the gun goes off, reset that trigger as fast as possible and be ready to shoot again. So I'm gonna shoot slowly here, but I'm gonna reset the trigger quickly. It should look something like this. So you may or may not even really be seeing that trigger moving. I'm just simply reaching that trigger while the gun is in recoil as quickly as I can and coming back to it. I don't do it perfectly all the time, but to the best of your ability, that's kind of the goal you want to run with. Now, let me say this really quickly. When it comes to reaching the trigger, what I don't want you thinking about is trying to ride the trigger out just until you hear that click and you stop instantly right there. Why is that a problem? Well, number one, your finger is not like mechanically calibrated to know exactly where that is. Some people can get really good at it, but the problem is the faster you try to go, the more you'll want to try to cheat that and make that as short as possible. This is where one of the places where trigger freeze comes from, right? When I pull the trigger, the slide cycles, and I try to let that trigger back out, but instead of letting it all the way out, I let it out a little bit, and then I try to pull again, and the trigger's still dead, and it's going click, bang, right? That's what kind of trigger freeze really is. So I don't want you guys thinking about that. I would much rather you just simply come off on, really back violently off the trigger, back onto it as quickly as you can. That's really going to be the best way to think about it. That's the best way to practice it in dry fire. You want to get used to coming off that trigger a little bit too far and coming back onto it. I would much rather you get off on quickly than really try to slowly hit that exact spot and sometimes miss it. That's going to lead to trigger freeze and just more issues in the long run, okay? Now, the second place that trigger freeze really comes from, which I really want to talk to you guys about here, if you're having troubles getting off the trigger quickly, a lot of times it's from firing hand tension. So in other words, if I'm really vicing down on the gun super hard with this, it's sometimes hard for me to actually get this finger to straighten out and get all the way off the trigger. That's one of the things that can really cause and influence trigger freeze. So a lot of people think they are relaxing their firing hand, but they're really not. So I want to show you a drill to help you figure out how to relax your firing hand. So this is actually one that I picked up from Wonsit Kim. I absolutely love it. What I'm actually gonna do is I'm just gonna fire single-handedly. I'm not gonna aim at a target. I'm gonna aim in the dirt, just into the berm, and I'm not gonna worry about recoil control at all, right? So I'm just gonna go like this. And essentially what I'm doing here is I'm just asking myself the question, did the gun move inside of my hand at all? The reason for this is simple. If I'm gonna define, hey, how much tension do I actually need to put on the gun, it's just enough to where the gun doesn't move inside of my hand. That's the only real requirement for firing hand pressure and tension on the gun. I don't want the gun actually moving around inside of my hand, okay? So to find that threshold, I'm gonna keep shooting into the berm. I'm gonna back off, 5–10% pressure each time until I find that pressure point to where the gun actually slips in my hand a little bit. Kind of a dangerous proposition. I don't want to go super, way too light to where the gun flies out of my hand. So I'm going to back it off just a little bit at a time. And I'm going to try to find that pressure point to where the gun actually kind of moves in my hand, right? So here we go. All right, so I'm going to relax a little bit more, relax a little bit more. It's still really not moving in my hand. I'm going to do it again. Man, I got to really relax. Okay, there it was. I kind of felt it slip in my hand a little bit there, okay? So now I'm going to add just a smidge of pressure back to where the gun doesn't move, and I'm going to fire it again to make sure the gun doesn't move this time. Man, I'm super relaxed in that gun. Immediately, with that pressure in mind, I'm going to add this, clamp down, and then I'm going to fire the gun and see what that does for me. You'll be surprised, right? Some folks are amazed how fast they can run the trigger once they really relax that firing hand. I've literally had students that were having troubles getting below like 2/10 in their splits. I had them run through that drill, relax the hand all the way, and start shooting doubles, and they would throw a 10 for the first time in their life. It really does make a big deal. So think about relaxing this hand if that's an issue that you run into. Okay, so let's quickly talk about recoil control. Obviously, if I'm able to pull the trigger quickly with my guns jumping all over off of the target, that's an issue, and it's not really going to work out super well for me. Okay, I have to be able to hit as well as go fast. I want to speed up and get my hits, right? So the goal of good recoil control is not really to keep the gun perfectly flat. It is specifically to get the gun, when it goes off, to return back to exactly where it came from as quickly as possible. The best way to train this, I don't need a timer or anything, it's just simply get set up just like the trigger drill, where my sights and my grip, where everything's perfect exactly the way that I want it, and my sights are perfectly in the middle of the target, and I'm just going to pull the trigger twice. It's important that I do this pretty much as quick as I can, because again, if we want to go fast, we want to be able to pull the trigger as quick as we can and still hit the target. The point of this drill is to see if I can do the jerk the trigger drill perfectly, then I should be hitting this target dead center with my first shot every single time, right? The question is, where does it go for that second shot? That's what I want to make sure is okay, is that for that second shot, it doesn't jump off the target and go somewhere else, okay? I should see a bunch of shots as I do this, 2 at a time. I should see a bunch of shots really good in the center, and then I was looking to see if there's any trends from where that second shot goes. Does it climb to the right? Does it climb straight up and come straight down? Different things like that, right? Different trends that I see are going to have different solutions. They're all going to revolve around changing pressures with my firing hand, with my support hand, with my wrist angle, with my elbow extension. Are my shoulders relaxed, or are they super tense? There's a lot of things that I can think about. In addition, let me mention this, make sure your eyes are staying glued to the spot that you want to hit in the center of the target every single time. If you're not sure if that's what's happening or not, you can occlude your dot, put some tape over it, and if you actually try to look at your dot, the whole target will just disappear, and then it'll kind of let you know really quickly that you're not shooting target focus. But a lot of times what happens is, as we're looking at that spot, we see the dot jump up and our eyes kind of follow it, right? And then our second shot just goes wherever we're looking at the time. So make sure your eyes are staying glued to a spot. I'm not going to give a whole discussion on grip and recoil control, all that stuff right now, because we've talked about that in other videos. You can check those out. If you have questions, let me know. We'll do another follow-up video on grip. We could talk about that all day long. But just think about your pressures and your hand positioning, and try to figure out those doubles where you can just pull the trigger nice and quick and the dot comes back every single time to the same exact spot. Now, what we're going to talk about a little bit is actually changing the way your brain thinks and processes time. I'm trying not to be too fantastical or hyperbolic about this, but in our daily lives, we don't measure time in hundredths or even thousandths of a second. We just don't think about it that way. We tend to think more about minutes and hours, right? Quarters of hours more than we do even seconds. And now we're trying to figure out, how do I take 200ths of a second off of my splits or whatever you're trying to improve on? That's really tough. One of the other guys that's known on the internet for his splits a little bit, Milspec Mojo, kind of credits his speed on the trigger for actually his experience as a drummer, right? Like that rhythm capability on the drums transfers right over to running your gun. It's a very similar kind of concept there. We have to be able to actually do things very consistently, control it, get the gun to go off exactly when we mean for it to go off, and just get our brains to process the cadences we're looking for at higher speeds. Go fast juice. So the first drill I want to show you here, I actually picked up from Travis Haley back in the day, and I really enjoy it. This is one of the drills that I did in ad nauseum when I first started shooting, and I really credit a lot of the split speed that I have today with this particular drill. And it's a drill that's not just about learning how to go faster, but how to be really consistent with your shots and basically gain rhythm behind the trigger and get the gun to go off exactly when you mean for it to go off. So let me show you this first one. I'm gonna put the timer on instant because I don't care about the really the first shot time at all, just looking at my splits. And I'm gonna start with a slow cadence of fire. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. And I wanna see the most consistent splits on that cadence that I possibly can. Hopefully with less than a 1/10 variation, max variation in my split time. Let me show you what I'm talking about. It looks something like this. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, okay? So there's my 5 shots, and now I'm gonna look at my splits. So we have a 95, 95, 92, 87, 87. That last one was a little bit slow, but still significantly under, well, not significantly, but we're about a 0.8 max variation. But you notice those first several were right on top of each other, 95, 95, 92. That's the kind of consistency that I'm really looking for. I could not do that to save my life when I first started doing these drills. Something I actually had to work on quite a bit. You say, well, why is that important? Don't I want to shoot my sights, not shoot a cadence? A lot of times, yes. However, when we're shooting inside of a certain distance, where we can now start shooting predictively, as an example, let's say I have this target, a USPSA target at 7 yards, okay? I know I can just shove the gun in the center of that A-zone and pull the trigger as fast as I mechanically can, and I will get A-zone hits every single time, right? Because I've proven that in training. So I'm not gonna wait around any longer than that. I don't need to pull the trigger, wait for the dot to come back, see it come back, go, yep, there it is, I can pull the trigger again, and then pull the trigger again. That's gonna be really slow. Inside of a certain distance or on a certain level of target difficulty, it is appropriate to simply just pull the trigger as fast as you can. But obviously outside of that distance or on greater target difficulties, I'm gonna shoot my sights. So quick little explanation there, but this is why it's important to train your brain on rhythms so that once you get inside of that threshold, you can run it pretty quick. Once I get able to kind of master this first one, I'll move to 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. That would look something like this. And 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. All right, let's see what our splits are here. Should be right around a half second. 56, 51, 55, 46, exactly a 1/10 variation on there. I knew that last one was a little bit quick, but that's still within kind of my threshold of acceptability for the drill. Now we're gonna shrink that significantly as we start getting faster. Now it's only acceptable to have about half a 1/10 variation. Next cadence is just going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're getting around 20 split neighborhood now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That should look something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And our splits are 22, 24, 22, 22. So we have a 0.02 max variation there, which is well within the acceptable range of a half a 1/10 or 0.05. That's kind of what we're looking for at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cadence. Now we're going to really speed it up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I would actually take some time and try to tap this cadence like out on your hand or on a table or whatever. If you can't actually think of the cadence and tap it out, then you're not gonna be able to do it behind the gun, right? So here is that cadence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're getting closer to 15s now. All right, let's have a look. I actually pushed that one a little bit quicker than I intended to. 13, 13, 13, 12. So very, very consistent. Right there on that 12, 13 kind of threshold, right? Now, if you find it difficult getting to that kind of a cadence, what do you do, right? This is where I can actually start using specific cadences and listening to them and trying to actually learn them, okay? The way to do this traditionally was with our metronome. And of course we have metronome apps now, which is most convenient. But if you're not a musician, sometimes the controls in there are a little bit confusing. So what we have now on YouTube is actually metronome videos. And I'll link some of these below, but you can just literally search 400 beats per minute or however many beats per minute you want on YouTube and find a video that'll give you the cadence. So here's 400 BPM, that's what it sounds like. Hopefully you can hear that pretty good. That's about a 15 split, okay? 400 beats per minute equals out to about 15 splits. So I could actually listen to that and try to tap along with it, right? And see if I can get my brain to kind of match that cadence, right? Now that may sound super fast to some of you folks, right? So one of the ways to make that sound slower and get kind of a grasp for it is actually kind of a little bit of speed inoculation, right? Force your brain to think even faster, and then we'll slow it back down. So if I go to, say, 600 BPM, this would be about a 12 split. You can, of course, play this on your own, try to tap along with it. Again, I'm just gonna try to kind of tap it out. And just kind of match that cadence. Again, if I can't match it just tapping a table or whatever, there's no way I'm gonna be able to match it on the gun. Let's push it even one step farther. We're gonna now get to 600 BPM. This is, of course, the ultimate 10 split, right? And again, you can try to tap along with that and nail that cadence. Now I'm gonna go back and play for you the 400 again real quick. And if you're like me, now this sounds so slow and it's just so easy to follow. Right? And so what I can literally do now is play this cadence and try to match it, right? So I'm literally gonna tap along with it. Once I feel like I have an idea of that cadence, I'm gonna make sure I have some ammo. Let me just play this cadence. These are 15 splits. And we'll try to match them on the gun. Let's see how close we got. Number 1, 15, 16, 15, 15. 1/100th of a second variation because I gave myself an actual specific cadence of fire that I wanted to go at, right? And I'm just able to hit those very, very consistently. We'll pause for the airplane to go over. So the reason that's important is very simple. Simply telling my brain, hey, pull the trigger as fast as you can is not a precise or specific set of commands. It doesn't tell my brain exactly what to do. It just says, hey, pull as fast as you can. That sounds like tensing up and doing things hard and doing things fast, and it really is counterintuitive to staying relaxed and actually just running the trigger on kind of a set cadence. The more you practice with these cadences, the more your brain can just deploy them on demand without even necessarily thinking of a cadence. You just see it, a target on a stage or a self-defense situation or whatever it is, and you can just hit, execute on that macro, if you will, of 12 splits or 10 splits or whatever you're able to do, and run the trigger as fast as you can, right? So guys, I hope that's helpful for just understanding a little bit how important it is to actually understand how fast you're trying to go, get your brain to be able to kind of process it, and then how to practice it on the gun, if you will. This is one of those things that requires a lot of live ammo. The drills we started off with can be done in dry fire. Resetting the trigger, pulling the trigger at speed, that kind of stuff is super important to practice dry, but then you do have to get on the range and lay down, a lot of strings, right? When you're starting to run these strings, you can do whatever you want. I would do at least 5. You can bump it up to 6 or more. What some folks find, that especially when they're starting off, their first couple splits will be slower, and then their brain kind of gets into gear and ramps up speed as you go. And you can start getting really fast towards the end of your string and starting to figure out what that feels like. So do some longer strings as well. Shoot lots of doubles, just 2 at a time. Try to get those quick, but then extend your strings as well and play around with that. And make sure that tension isn't building up over time as you pull the trigger, that your gun's not moving around in your hand. All that kind of stuff is super important. All right, guys, hope that was really helpful for you guys in learning how to run your gun as fast as possible. If you have questions, please drop those down below and we'll get to them as soon as we can, or drop a follow-up video if we need to. Until next time, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.